When Claire opened the door that quiet Sunday morning, she didn't expect her life to take a turn she'd never forget. The sky outside was calm, a pale gray that hinted at rain. Her small house in Oregon felt too big lately, too silent. Her husband Martin had been gone for nearly 2 years, first emotionally, then physically after their quiet separation. Claire had built a life of peace and routine. But peace could sometimes be lonely. That morning, as she poured herself coffee, a message pinged on her phone. It was from her sister Laura. "Can you take Ryan for a few weeks? I got a last-minute work trip." Ryan was her 22-year-old nephew, studying architecture in Seattle. Claire hadn't seen him properly since he was in high school. He used to come around during summers, always curious, sketching random buildings in her yard. She smiled, remembering his quiet, polite nature. "Of course," she texted back. She didn't think much of it. Then it was just family helping family. Later that day, when Ryan arrived, she was surprised at how much he'd changed. He wasn't the shy kid she remembered. He had grown into a confident young man, tall, sharp-eyed, and easy to talk to. He carried a backpack and a warm smile. "Hey, Aunt Claire," he said softly. "Thanks for letting me stay." She hugged him, feeling that nostalgic warmth of family connection. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "You're family. Come in. I made lasagna." As they settled into dinner, conversation flowed easily. Ryan spoke about his college life, his passion for design, and how he dreamed of building homes that told stories. Claire found herself genuinely inspired by his optimism. He reminded her of her younger self, ambitious, fearless, full of hope. That night, after dinner, she went into the living room, where Ryan had already started sketching on his notepad. "Still obsessed with buildings, huh?" she asked, smiling. He grinned. "Yeah, I can't stop. I'm designing this lake house for a project. It's supposed to feel peaceful, but full of life." Claire nodded, impressed by his focus. "That sounds beautiful. I'd love to see it when it's done." "You will," he said, his tone sincere. "Actually, maybe I could use your advice. You've always had good taste. Maybe you could help me with color schemes and furniture layout." "Sure," she said without hesitation. "I'd love to help." Days passed easily. The house felt alive, again filled with laughter, conversation, and the smell of coffee and paint. Ryan often worked late into the night, spreading papers and pencils across the dining table. Claire would sit nearby, reading or knitting, sometimes glancing at his sketches. He had real talent. His lines were bold yet thoughtful. One evening, rain began to pour outside. The soft patter against the windows filled the house with a quiet comfort. Claire was making tea when Ryan walked in, holding one of his drawings. "I think I've finally figured out the layout," he said, excitement lighting up his face. She looked at the drawing, nodding. "It's stunning, Ryan. You've really grown into your craft." He smiled shyly. "Thanks. I learned from watching you. You always knew how to make a room feel like home." That compliment stayed with her. It wasn't romantic or inappropriate. It was genuine admiration. And yet, it stirred something gentle inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She brushed it off, focusing on their teamwork. They spent evenings discussing color tones and designs. He valued her opinions deeply, and that made her feel appreciated in a way she hadn't felt in years. As the days went on, Claire began to notice how much Ryan cared not just about his work, but about people. He'd cook breakfast for her, clean up without being asked, and sometimes leave small notes saying, "Thanks for helping, Aunt Claire." It's thoughtful, innocent. But it touched her heart. One night, while sorting through old family albums, they came across a picture of Ryan as a little boy at the beach holding Claire's hand. He laughed. "I remember that day. You taught me how to build sand castles." Claire chuckled softly. "You wouldn't stop until you made the biggest one on the shore." "Yeah," he said, smiling, "and you didn't let the waves ruin it." There was something about the way he said it, like he remembered every detail. Claire looked at him for a moment longer than usual, realizing how fast time had flown. This young man was once the boy she used to babysit, now sitting across from her talking about dreams, life, and loss like an equal. That night, after Ryan went to bed, Claire sat by the window. watching the rain again. She felt both grateful and conflicted. The house didn't feel lonely anymore, but that comfort scared her a little. She wondered if she was getting too attached to his company. But then she reminded herself he was family, and this was only temporary. The next morning, the sun finally came out. Ryan suggested going to a local art fair. "You'll love it," he said. "There's a furniture section that might give us ideas for my project." At the fair, they walked side by side, stopping to admire wooden sculptures and handmade crafts. A vendor mistook them for mother and son. "You two have similar eyes," she said kindly. Claire laughed, slightly embarrassed, while Ryan grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment," he joked. "Don't push your luck," Claire teased, shaking her head. On their way home, Ryan said quietly, "You know, I'm glad I came here. I didn't realize how much I missed this being around you." Claire smiled softly. "I missed you too, Ryan. You've grown into someone I'm really proud of." As they returned home, something subtle had shifted. Their bond had deepened, not in a forbidden way, but in a profoundly emotional one. Ryan had become a part of her healing, and she, unknowingly, was helping him find direction and purpose. That night, while working on his project, Ryan hesitated and then said, "Aunt Claire, can I tell you something? It's kind of personal." "Course," she said. "You can tell me anything." He looked nervous but genuine. "Sometimes I feel lost. Like I'm supposed to have everything figured out, but I don't. When I'm here, though, I feel calm, like I can think clearly." His words struck her deeply. She realized she had been feeling the same way for years, lost after her marriage ended, unsure of who she was without it. "You're not alone, Ryan," she said softly. "We all feel lost sometimes, but peace comes when we stop trying to control everything." Ryan nodded, thoughtful. "Maybe that's why being here feels right. You remind me that life doesn't have to be rushed." Claire smiled faintly. "And you remind me it's never too late to start again." They shared a quiet moment to souls from different generations, each healing something invisible. Later that night, as Claire turned off the lights, she couldn't stop thinking about what he said. There was something beautiful about their connection. It wasn't romantic. It was human, emotional, and deeply real. For the first time in years, she felt seen, and as she stood by the window once more, watching the moon reflect over the wet garden, she whispered to herself, "Maybe some people come into our lives not to stay forever, but to remind us what we've forgotten." Little did she know, Ryan's stay was about to change both their lives in ways neither of them expected. The next morning, his wish, the one that started it all, would finally come to light. And that wish would test everything she thought she understood about family, forgiveness, and the power of saying yes. The next morning began like any other, sunlight spilling through the blinds, the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen, and the soft sound of Ryan typing on his laptop at the table. Claire had gotten used to this rhythm. It brought a quiet comfort she hadn't realized she needed. But that morning, something about his expression told her he had something on his mind. He looked up as she entered. "Aunt Claire, can we talk?" "Of course," she said, setting down her cup. He hesitated for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "You've always been the one person in the family who listens. You don't judge, you just understand." Claire smiled gently. "That's kind of you to say. What's going on?" Ryan took a deep breath. "It's about my dad," he began. "He and Mom, they argue a lot. About money, about me, about everything. He thinks I'm wasting my life in architecture school. He wants me to join his business." Claire's heart softened. She had known her brother-in-law Mark for years. He was successful but rigid, always wanting control. "And what do you want?" she asked. "I want to finish what I started," Ryan said, his tone firm but emotional. "Design is what I love. It's what makes me feel alive." But he doesn't see that. He just sees numbers. Claire nodded. "Ryan, sometimes parents project their fears onto their children. It's not about you, it's about what they couldn't do themselves." Ryan looked at her with quiet admiration. "That's exactly what I thought. You always make things make sense." She smiled, touched. "Maybe because I've lived through my own share of confusion." They spent hours talking that day about dreams, family pressure, and the courage it takes to follow your heart. Ryan confessed that his biggest fear wasn't failure. It was disappointing the people he loved. Claire told him that real love means letting others find their own path. Even if it looks uncertain, that conversation brought them closer. Not in an inappropriate way, but in an emotional one, like to people who understood pain and hope at the same time. That evening, Ryan made dinner. It was his way of saying thank you. "I'm not a chef," he joked, stirring pasta in the pot, "but I watched a few videos online." Claire laughed softly. "If it's edible, I'll be impressed." When they sat down to eat, the power went out suddenly. The house fell into soft darkness except for the flicker of candles Claire quickly lit. They both laughed at the timing. "Well," Ryan said, "looks like dinner by candlelight." "It's oddly peaceful," Claire replied. They talked and laughed. As the rain began outside again, the house felt warm, alive. There was no awkwardness, no tension, just as souls who found comfort in each other's company. Later, when the power returned, Ryan stood by the window, looking thoughtful. "Aunt Claire," he said quietly, "can I tell you something personal? My wish, the one I mentioned before, it's not really about school or my dad. It's about something else." Claire frowned slightly, but nodded. "Go on. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be happy," he said. "And I realized I've never had someone who truly believes in me. Not the way you do. You make me feel like I'm worth something. My wish is simple. I want to make someone feel the same way you make me feel understood." His voice was soft, sincere. Claire's heart melted. There was nothing inappropriate in his tone, just raw emotion, gratitude, and respect. She smiled warmly. "That's a beautiful wish, Ryan. If more people thought like that, the world would be gentler." He nodded, smiling. "You taught me that." After that night, Claire began to notice changes in herself. She woke up earlier, cooked real breakfasts, and even started painting again, a hobby she'd abandoned years ago. Ryan's presence filled her home with life. He'd walk in with a mug of coffee, tease her about her messy paintbrushes, and encourage her to keep going. "You've got talent," he'd say. "You just forgot to believe it." It was strange. She thought how healing could come from unexpected places. She had taken him in to help her sister, but somehow he was helping her more. A week later, Ryan showed her his nearly finished project. "It's done," he said proudly, spreading out the blueprint on the table. The design was stunning, a lake house surrounded by tall windows and open spaces, filled with natural light. "It's beautiful," Claire whispered. "It feels alive." "That's what I wanted," Ryan said. "A home that breathes." She smiled. "You've captured something special." He looked at her, almost shyly. "You know, I modeled the interior after your house, the feeling of warmth, the colors, the quiet peace. I wanted people to feel what I feel when I'm here." Claire froze for a moment, deeply moved. "You did that." He nodded. "You inspired me." Her heart swelled. It wasn't just a compliment. It was a gift, a reminder that she mattered. For years she had been living quietly, believing her best days were behind her. But Ryan had unknowingly reminded her that purpose doesn't fade with age. It changes shape. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She sat by the window again, thinking of how fate works in mysterious ways. Sometimes healing doesn't come through grand gestures, it comes through presence, kindness, and being seen. The next morning, they decided to drive out to the lake where Ryan's design was inspired. The air was crisp, the water calm. Ryan took pictures, studying how the light reflected off the surface. "This is perfect," he said. Claire watched him, proud. "Your father will see your vision one day," she said softly. Ryan turned to her, smiling faintly. "I hope so. But even if he doesn't, I'm grateful I had someone who believed in me." They sat on a wooden bench by the shore. There was silence, but it wasn't empty, it was full of meaning. Then Ryan said quietly, "No, I used to think love only came from romance. But now I think it's about connection, about being known, being seen." Claire looked at him and nodded. "You're right. Love isn't always what we think. Sometimes it's about helping someone find themselves." As they drove back home, the sky turned orange with sunset. Claire felt peaceful. But deep down, she knew this peace wouldn't last forever. Ryan would return to Seattle soon. Life would move on. That night, as they packed some of his things, Claire found a folded paper in his sketchbook. It was a note addressed to her. She hesitated, then opened it. It read, "Thank you for saying yes. You've given me more than a place to stay. You've given me belief. I'll carry that forever." Her eyes softened. She hadn't realized that something as simple as saying yes to her sister's request would bring so much meaning into her life. When Ryan came into the room, she smiled. "You didn't have to write that, you know?" He shrugged, grinning. "Some things are better written than said." They both laughed, though there was a trace of sadness beneath it. Tomorrow, he'd be gone. That night, before bed, Claire whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the laughter, the light, and the healing that had unexpectedly entered her home. But deep inside, a quiet ache stirred. Not romantic longing, but the kind of emptiness that comes when something beautiful is about to end. She knew change was coming, and she wasn't sure she was ready. The next morning, Ryan packed his bags. Claire made breakfast like usual, but the silence between them was heavy. Finally, she said softly, "Promise me something. No matter what happens, don't stop believing in yourself." He nodded. "I won't. You taught me that." As he hugged her goodbye, Claire felt tears sting her eyes. "You'll do great things, Ryan." He smiled gently. "I already did. I met you again." Shh. When the door closed behind him, the house fell quiet once more. But it wasn't the lonely kind of quiet, it was peaceful. A quiet that carried meaning. Still later that evening, as she looked out the window, she saw something glimmering in the driveway. A small envelope Ryan must have dropped. She picked it up, her heart racing. Inside there was a small note and a photograph. The note read, "My wish wasn't just to be believed in. It was to bring someone hope again. I hope I did that." And with that, Claire understood Drian's wish had come true for both of them. The morning after Ryan left, Claire woke to a silence that felt heavier than usual. The house seemed larger, emptier, as though it had lost something it didn't know how to hold. His coffee mug still sat by the sink. His laughter still echoed faintly in her memory. For a moment, she stood by the window and watched the sunlight spill across the floor, thinking of how much that young man, had changed her life in such a short time. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of her life slowly returned, but nothing felt quite the same. She went back to her routines, rooting, tending to her small garden, painting, but the quiet moments often drew her back to the memories of those evenings spent talking with Ryan. He had filled the house with light. Not the kind from a lamp, but the kind that made people believe again. One evening, as the sun was setting, Claire received an email from Ryan. The subject line read, "Guess who finally got approved?" Her heart lifted as she opened it. The message was short but full of joy. "Aunt Claire, the firm loved my design. They want to feature it in their new eco-housing project. I wish you could see how happy I am. Couldn't have done this without you." Claire smiled, her eyes welling up. Kate could almost hear his voice in the words excited, grateful, alive. "Kate," she typed back, "I'm proud of you, Ryan. I always knew you'd make it." That message marked the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. Ryan called every week, sometimes from his tiny apartment in Seattle, other times from a construction site, his voice full of energy. "They're actually building it, Aunt Claire. The lake house well, a version of it." Every time she heard from him, Claire's heart swelled with pride. But after the calls ended, she'd sit quietly for a moment, realizing how much she missed his presence, the laughter, the teasing, the feeling of being needed again. One afternoon, she received a package in the mail. It was from Ryan. Inside was a framed sketch's final version of the lake house, signed at the bottom. Beneath it, a note read, "This belongs to the person who helped me build more than a house. She helped me rebuild myself." Claire placed the frame on her living room wall, right where the sunlight hit it every morning. It became a small reminder that love, in its purest form, wasn't always romantic. Sometimes it was about kindness, belief, and the courage to see beauty in someone's journey. A few months later, Claire decided to take a trip to Seattle. It had been years since she'd traveled, and Ryan had been asking her to visit. "You've got to see the project in person," he said over the phone. "It's finally finished, and I want you to be the first to walk through it." When she arrived, Ryan greeted her with a huge smile. He looked older, somehow more confident, but the same warmth shone in his eyes. "You made it," he said, hugging her tightly. "Of course," she replied with a smile. "How could I miss this?" They drove out to the lake together. The car wound down the narrow road. Claire's breath caught when the house came into view. It was beautiful tall glass windows reflecting the water, wooden textures blending with the trees, and an open space that seemed to invite sunlight inside. "It's perfect," she whispered. Ryan grinned. "Wait until you see the inside." When they stepped through the door, Claire felt an ache of recognition. The layout reminded her of her own home, the cozy corners, the warm tones, the quiet serenity. "You really did design this with your heart," she said softly. He nodded. "I did. You taught me that home isn't about walls, it's about how it feels when you walk in." They toured the house together, and as they reached the balcony overlooking the lake, Claire turned to him. "Ryan, I can't tell you how proud I am of you. You've grown so much." He looked at her, emotion flickering in his eyes. "You know, I was so lost before I came to you. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted, but being around you, it gave me clarity. You reminded me that dreams are worth fighting for." Claire smiled, her voice soft. "Sometimes people come into our lives not to stay forever, but to help us remember who we are." Ryan nodded. "And sometimes they stay forever anyway in the heart." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the reflection of the sky on the lake. It was one of those rare moments when words felt unnecessary that evening. Ryan hosted a small dinner to celebrate the completion of the project. His colleagues admired Claire, calling her the inspiration behind the design. She laughed and blushed, feeling both proud and humbled. For years, she had lived quietly, almost invisibly. And now she realized how deeply she had impacted someone's life simply by being herself. After dinner, Ryan drove her back to her hotel. On the way, he said quietly, "Aunt Claire, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. My dad and I talked." For the first time in years, it felt like a real conversation. "I told him about everything, how I stayed with you, what I learned, and how you helped me." Claire glanced at him, surprised. "What did he say?" "He cried," Ryan admitted. "He said he never realized how much pressure he put on me. He wants to see the project tomorrow." Claire smiled softly. "That's wonderful, Ryan. Maybe this is the healing you both needed." Ryan nodded. "It is, and it started because of you." That night, Claire lay in bed thinking about how life worked in circles. You give kindness, and somehow it finds its way back to you. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the way you expect, but it always returns the next day. She joined Ryan and his father at the lake. Watching the two of them talk, she could see the tension had faded. They laughed, discussed the future, and for the first time, there was peace between them. When Ryan hugged his father goodbye, there was no resentment, only understanding. Claire stood back, smiling, tears in her eyes. Later, as she prepared to leave Seattle, Ryan walked her to the car. "So," he said playfully, "when's your next art show?" Claire laughed. "I don't think the world is ready for that yet." "Oh, I think it is," he said. "You just have to believe it." She smiled. "I will, and so should you." He hugged her one last time, lingering just a second longer, as if neither wanted to let go. "Thank you, Aunt Claire, for everything, for saying yes when it mattered most." "Thank you, Ryan," she whispered, "for reminding me what life feels like." As the plane took off, Claire looked out the window, her heart full. She thought of that young boy who had arrived at her doorstep, lost and uncertain, and of the man who now stood proudly in his purpose. His wish had been to make someone feel seen, and he had. When she returned home, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt peaceful, alive, She began to paint again, this time a large canvas of a lake at sunset, with a house that seemed to glow from within. Every brushstroke felt like a story of healing, of connection, of two lives crossing paths at the perfect time. And when she finished, she placed the painting beside Ryan's framed sketch. Together, they told a story without words, a story of belief, kindness, and love that asked for nothing in return. Months later, she received one more letter from Ryan. Inside was a photograph of a new project he was leading. Along with a short note, every design begins with a heart that listens. You taught me that. Thank you for being my heart when I couldn't hear my own. Claire smiled as she read it. She placed the letter inside the frame beside his drawing and whispered softly, "You kept your wish, Ryan, and I'll keep mine to never stop saying yes to life." That evening, as the light faded and the room filled with golden quiet, Claire realized something beautiful sometimes. Saying yes to one person's wish can change two lives forever.